Genesis 40 Bible Study, KJV. Joseph interprets the dreams in prison. Introduction. Today we will study Genesis chapter 40 verses 1 through 23 from the King James Version of the Bible. This passage continues the powerful story of Joseph, a man chosen by God who experienced betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and imprisonment. Yet even in the darkest places, the presence of God remained with him. Genesis 40 teaches us a profound spiritual truth: God is still working. Even when our lives seem delayed or forgotten, Joseph is in prison, but God is preparing him for a throne. This chapter reveals how God speaks, how he works behind the scenes, and how his timing is perfect. Let us explore the passage step by step. 1. Historical and biblical context. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob and the first son of Rachel. Because Joseph was favored by his father and received prophetic dreams from God, his brothers became jealous and sold him into slavery in Egypt. He was purchased by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. Although Joseph served faithfully, he was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. But Genesis repeatedly tells us something important. The Lord was with Joseph. Even in prison, God's presence never left him. Genesis 40 takes place during this time in the Egyptian royal prison. 2. The setting Pharaoh's officials in prison. Genesis chapter 40 verses 1 through 4. Two important officials of Pharaoh are imprisoned: the chief butler, cupbearer, the chief baker. In ancient Egypt, these were extremely trusted positions. The cupbearer protected Pharaoh from poison and served his wine. The baker prepared the king's food. Being imprisoned meant they had somehow offended Pharaoh. They were placed in the same prison where Joseph was. Providentially, Joseph was assigned to serve them. This was not coincidence. It was God arranging events for Joseph's future elevation. Even when we cannot see it, God is positioning people and circumstances for his plan. 3. The dreams given by God. Genesis chapter 40, verses 5 through 8. One night, both men had dreams, but these dreams troubled them deeply. In the ancient world, dreams were often believed to carry divine messages. Yet the Egyptians depended on magicians and dream interpreters. But here in prison, there were no interpreters. When Joseph noticed their sadness, he asked them what was wrong. They replied, "We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." Joseph then says something remarkable. Do not interpretations belong to God? This reveals Joseph's deep spiritual understanding. Joseph did not claim supernatural power. Instead, he acknowledged that only God reveals truth. This reflects the Hebrew worldview. In Hebrew theology, wisdom, revelation, and interpretation belong to God alone. Joseph becomes an instrument through whom God speaks. 4. The cupbearer's dream. Genesis chapter 40, verses 9 through 15. The chief cupbearer describes his dream. He saw, 3 branches, grapes that ripened quickly. He pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup. Joseph interprets the dream. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh would restore the cupbearer to his position. Joseph then makes a humble request. He asks the cupbearer to remember him when he is restored. Joseph explains that he was stolen from his homeland, innocent of the crime that placed him in prison. This moment reveals Joseph's humanity. Even a man of faith still hopes for justice. But the story will reveal something deeper about God's timing. 5. The baker's dream. Genesis chapter 40, verses 16 through 19. Encouraged by the positive interpretation, the chief baker shares his dream. He saw 3 baskets of bread on his head, birds eating from the top basket. Joseph gives a different interpretation. In 3 days, Pharaoh would execute the baker. The birds eating the bread symbolized birds feeding on his body after death. This interpretation reminds us that God's revelation sometimes brings difficult truth. Joseph faithfully speaks what God reveals. He does not alter the message to please the listener. This shows spiritual integrity. A servant of God must communicate truth faithfully. 6. Fulfillment of the dreams. Genesis chapter 40, verses 20 through 22. 3 days later, Pharaoh celebrated his birthday. On that day, the cupbearer was restored. The baker was executed, exactly as Joseph interpreted. This demonstrates the reliability of God's revelation. Throughout the Bible, when God speaks, his word comes to pass. This event also foreshadows Joseph's future role as interpreter of Pharaoh's dreams in Genesis 41. God was preparing Joseph step by step. 7. The painful silence. Genesis chapter 40, verses 23. The chapter ends with a heartbreaking sentence. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. Joseph helped the cupbearer. But when the cupbearer returned to power, he forgot Joseph. Joseph remained in prison 2 more years. From a human perspective, this seems unfair. But from God's perspective, something greater was happening. God's timing is different from human timing. Joseph was not forgotten by God. He was being prepared. 8. Spiritual lessons and God's purpose. Genesis 40 teaches several powerful spiritual truths. 1. God works, even in hidden places. Joseph was not in a palace. He was in a prison. Yet God was working. Many times God prepares his servants in hidden seasons. The prison became Joseph's training ground. 2. God's timing is perfect. Joseph waited years for deliverance. But if Joseph had been released earlier, he would not have stood before Pharaoh. Sometimes delays are actually divine preparation. What feels like waiting may actually be God, positioning us for something greater. 3. Faithfulness in small places matters. Joseph served faithfully even in prison. He noticed the sadness of the other prisoners. He used his gift to help them. Faithfulness in small places opens the door for greater responsibility. 4. God alone reveals truth. Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" This statement reflects the biblical understanding that wisdom comes from God. True understanding is not merely human intelligence. It is divine revelation. 9. Application for our lives today. In modern life, many people experience seasons like Joseph's prison. Times of waiting, injustice, delay, forgotten efforts. Genesis 40 reminds us that God is still working behind the scenes. Even when people forget us, God does not forget. The cupbearer forgot Joseph, but God remembered him. Soon, Joseph would be lifted from prison to become ruler over Egypt. The prison was not the end of Joseph's story. It was the preparation for his destiny. And the same God still works in the lives of his people today. Conclusion. Genesis 40 reveals the mysterious ways God works through dreams, delays, and difficult circumstances. Joseph remained faithful to God even when his life seemed unfair. And through this story, we learn a powerful truth. God may allow seasons of waiting, but his purposes are always good. Even when the world forgets you, God remembers. Thank you.